Hi, this is Tom Broussard. Glad to see everybody back again, getting ready for winter, although it's in the 40s and 50s here up in Maine. So it is interesting these days. It's probably not going to get down to 10 or 20 below like it used to be in Bodenham 20, 30, 40 years ago on a regular basis during the winter. But the climate is changing all the time. Anyhow, the article today is about photosynthesis and plasticity, and really the magic of creating something like sunlight and thought into uh, leaves and new brain matter. Um, During the process of me getting better, and that took years, um, I never knew how it was happening, even though I was beginning to understand how it was happening. What was it that was making me get better were these activities, the cognitive activities, thoughts about memories. Um, and I began to understand that I was doing those types of activities without yet knowing that they were therapeutic. But as I got better, I also was reading more, beginning to understand that these activities is what made me get better. But I still didn't understand the process, right? Because it's not magic, although I mentioned magic in the title. It's not magic that I went from losing what I had lost, could not read, write, or speak well. Now I can. How did that happen? Um, Plasticity is the answer, but what is it that makes that happen? And As I was working my way through this, beginning to understand it, I really did think about photosynthesis as another um, activity that converts sunlight into um, uh, green leaves. And as I thought about that, I thought about thought and cognitive activities really being the sunlight that does convert those activities and the energy that comes as a result of those activities into new brain matter. So in my case, once I knew that the hundreds of millions of cells that I lost and the associated metaphorical branches and leaves, the dendrites and synapses, um, when they were gone, I began to realize that, of course, they were never going to come back. So it turns out that the remaining cells that are perfectly healthy, have that capacity to grow new dendrites and synapses based on those activities. So that's how I came to understand all of that. And with my next book, I needed to write this last chapter, and this is the one about photosynthesis and plasticity. And as I got better, without yet knowing that I was getting better, it really wasn't until after a certain amount of time goes by, and then I had the consciousness to have the memory to go back and realize, oh, that's what I sounded like before, or wrote about before, or had problems with before. And over time, you get to look back and see how it has improved over time. Um, the and But once my therapy started and then ended so quickly because I had good insurance and I had 30 sessions, but they're each 30 minutes each, twice a week. That's 30 sessions, 15 hours of therapy spread across 4 months or so. And um, I was beginning to understand that something must come later, because I could not imagine that what it turned out to be incredibly small amount of therapy, formal, conventional, paid therapy, that somehow would induce all of the plasticity, all of those additional millions of, if not billions, of synapses to grow overnight, or even over 4 months with just those couple of classes uh, sessions. And the as I read more about it, of course, that plasticity uh, requires those activities, but they need the activities to occur regularly, persistently, repetitively, and become a habit such that you can do it every day, every day, every day. And excuse me. And as you get better because of the principles of plasticity, which includes, of course, repetition and intensity of quote work, of activity. Um, so uh, that's when I realized that the therapists themselves are incredibly important for the journey for all of us learning how we'll get better. But I also realized that the therapists are really just the start, just the very immediate first thing you have to do is start this process of basically starting the engine, but it's that engine that needs the fuel to keep on doing what it normally would do to continue to quote get better. But you do need the fuel, and the fuel in this case is the activities themselves. So once I realized all of those things, it's very important that we have our therapists because that what gets us going. Another metaphor is that the therapists are not unlike the old hand crank with the old early cars, which we didn't have electrical starters. You had to crank them, and we had to crank the car to get it to go to actually start, induce, as it were, the sparks from the spark plugs. And once they started working, they take off the crank and they put it away and they get in the car. So same thing happens with the therapist. They have to help us crank and get this engine running, but we run out of time, as it were. Now it's up to us, but now it's running. Now you can continue to have the fuel you need and keep it going. So you're charging the car based on the energy you have. It just so happens to be that the fuel happens to be the activities that create, induce plasticity going forward. So, but it cannot be as important as it is. It isn't that we get better based on those couple of hours at the very beginning. Um, it really is this lifelong marathon, and we get better based on the start. The people with the crank, they can actually start that engine. Now it's up to us. Now it's up to us. And as the therapists know, that the 5 rules of recovery is, and I've said this before, but motivation and practice. I said 5: motivation, practice, 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 practice. But giving all those principles of plasticity, repetition and intensity, and several other activities that are all built around this ability to create more or less cells. I'm sorry, the dendrites and synapses all attached to the remaining cells that begin to make the connectivity that allows you to finally come together enough to, excuse me, to make that connection, and now able to speak what you couldn't speak or pronounce before. And that is the difference, the distance between the final critical mass as you get closer. And once you get close enough, you have enough critical mass, so now you can pronounce what you couldn't do before. And that really is creating the dendrites and synapses and making the connectivity that becomes this network of those neurons, and now can pronounce what you couldn't pronounce before. So that really is how it works, is the connectivity that comes with the critical mass that is created. So you have enough material to make that connection. But it does not it does appear it is, and I know that the scientists have more information that will help you better understand it. But most of us with stroke and aphasia aren't scientists, and we need to have words we can understand so that given what the scientists have given us, we read it from our articles, we begin to interpret that in a way that we can understand, in many cases with the metaphors of what we've described here, being the crank for the SLP, as it were, being an engine that can run, but it has to be started, and then the fuel for that particular engine has to be the fuel that comes from almost the day-to-day activity that you do that does induce more plasticity. and you've seen some of my work and some of my slides, and you actually have video of the neurons, the cells, what they are doing as you are thinking, and they have video of that, so you can actually see what you are thinking. You can actually see those cells with their appendages, these dendrites and synapses, and you see them further away in the field. This is on a video. And you see it coming closer, closer, but it's not closer, they're growing more. So instead of these, they get bigger and bigger and bigger with more and more and more connectivity until you can see they come together with others coming together too, again, becoming part of that critical mass. But that is the direct link between thought and cognitive activities that induce plasticity and rewiring the brain. That is how the press usually talks about it, rewiring the brain. That's a good way to consider it as rewiring, because you haven't gotten new copper and threaded in there. What you have done is you have that metaphorical copper, those nerves, to grow what turns out to be thousands of miles of fiber that you've lost from your stroke. You're going to grow more, thousands. That's why it takes a long, long time. It does not happen overnight, nor just because of a couple of hours of activity of one kind or another. It has to be therapeutic. It has to be long term to have that go on for a year or 2 or 3 or 4. And that is how plasticity works, and how when it comes to, quote, rewiring, you really haven't done anything more than grow the remaining cells with that capacity to grow more of those nerves, more of those dendrites and synapses. So I know it's not magic, but sometimes it might as well be, given that we, all of us, have so many friends, and on a, I'll say day to day, but we don't really mean it that way, but over a couple of months, as we all can see other friends who have on their own journey of recovery, all of us, because we sort of live with this, with our social groups, our stroke groups, our support groups, and people around the world, we actually get to see them month to month to month. And sure enough, I have one in Russian, in Moscow. We talk regularly, a couple days, a couple times a month. And I can tell, because it's now been a couple of years. So when Len is talking about other issues that he has, that he really wants to get better, but he's working on this or this or this. And I say, Len, you are getting better, because 2 years ago, you couldn't have said that you knew enough to then tell me, oh, Tom, I've done all these good things. Now I have to do more good things. You didn't have those good things 2 years ago. So it is such an amazing, magical process that it really does get to that point, because you're doing nothing more nor less, as easy as, although it's not so much easy if you don't really like to do some of these activities. So if you don't like reading, you're probably not going to read quite as much as you would like to, given that you have to do it pretty much regularly. Same thing with reading or writing. But that is the path that you could be on. And that certainly is the path that many of my friends, even those who were even most severe, because I was lucky that I wasn't as severe as my friends, clearly it's going to take a long, long time, if not the rest of their lives, as it does with me. But I'm working out those last little bits that I can still see or appreciate, or can mispronounce words, and I'll chase them down and try and pronounce them enough times that I can get to one last little bit that I can better speak about again. So the same thing happens no matter how severe. Some of my friends who are completely mute, I haven't met anybody who's completely mute and then years later are still completely mute. So they continue to grow from just a few words to now hundreds of words. And that is basically, you are seeing it in front of you, how those additional webs are spun right in front of your eyes. So thank you again. It's nice to see everybody. I will see you again next month with the last article, maybe 2, depends what I've got time going on for the year. And then we get into 2022. And I'm looking forward to the next set of articles coming forward, helping other people with stroke and aphasia learn how it is that we all learn through what are otherwise some relatively simple things that do convert the energy that comes from that into new brain matter. Thanks again. Happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you in a couple weeks. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.